Hey friends, thanks for tuning in. Today I'll be making a delicious recipe that's perfect if you're trying to feed a large family on a tight budget. Not only is it delicious, but it's nutritious also, and it's a great meal for meal prepping and then adding to the freezer for later use. It's also a great recipe to can. Simply add it to some pasta for an easy weeknight meal. At the end of the video, I'll talk about some other meals that you can make from the sauce that I'll be making in this recipe. Basically, I'll be making a dish that's inspired by a ragu or bolognese sauce. And the sauce itself is used with different kinds of pasta and also to make lasagna a la bolognese. I've got some additional ideas on how to use this sauce towards the end of the video. Because I'm making a low-cost version of this dish, I'll be using lentils as a protein source. However, you can always swap those out for ground beef or whatever else you have. If you'll be using lentils, I definitely don't recommend talking about this beforehand to your family. I have to admit, I've never thought that lentil bolognese sounded appetizing. I just don't like the idea of beans in my spaghetti. It just doesn't sound good, which is why I haven't made this already. But I have been eyeing a recipe on the blog Rainbow Plant Life. It has over 1,000 5-star reviews, and it's convinced me to give this recipe a try. Plus, I do like the fact that it's super cheap and it's nutritious. It's a very high protein meal. I'm going to very loosely be following this recipe because I'm going with whatever's in my pantry, and I think you should do the same. I'll post the original recipe in the description area of my video, along with my recipe and how I would make it if I'm trying to save some money. The original recipe called for white onion, but I'm using red because that's what I have. But obviously you can use onion powder to cut costs. Lots of recipes use different kinds of lentils here. I think the recipe I was loosely following called for all red lentils, but I only had these split red lentils, so I'm going to be using half and half of the green with the red. Obviously, if you're trying to hide the lentils in the sauce, then using the split red lentils would be a great option. And again, we're just using those because they're full of fiber and protein. Basic costs on this meal, including spaghetti with today's pricing using Walmart ingredients, not including your dry spices and oil and vinegar, come in at 90 cents per serving. And if you added in the walnuts, it would probably be about $1.20 per serving, maybe a little less. But then again, I guess that depends on what costs are for walnuts where you live. I know Dollar Tree has a bag that would be perfect in this. I think the last time I got mine for $2.99 a pound, and we're just using a small amount. Again, I'm doing all of this prep work in the morning so that this will be ready when I get home. I can just throw it all into the saucepan. And I'm using fresh garlic because I got an awesome deal on this. So I'm just going to cut this up. But again, if you want to use your dry spices to make this easier and less expensive, it'll totally be fine. This looks like a lot of ingredients, but really it's just 4 main ingredients: the spaghetti, the lentils, tomatoes, and tomato paste. The other items can all be dry spices, and of course the chopped walnuts are purely optional, but I'm starting with a half cup of split red lentils. These cook very quickly, so I'll just cook these in the sauce. So I basically have a total of 1 cup of dry lentils, and I have what was a half cup of dry green lentils that I cooked this morning. I have about 1/3 of a red onion, 4 chopped garlic cloves, some diced tomatoes I'll be using, and I'll be using my pantry staples of vegetable bouillon, but of course you can use whatever you have. I've got some balsamic vinegar. If you don't have this in your pantry, I'll let you know some options to sub in later. And here are the walnuts that I said were optional. Those are just going to give it some more texture, and I'm curious to see how I like these in the dish. And then I have this tomato paste that I've been wanting to try against the tomato paste that I have in my cabinet, so I'm going to give that a taste test. I've heard a lot of people say that the kind in the tube is better, so I thought it was about time that I find out. And then I have my all-time favorite pasta, which is Barilla spaghetti, but of course any pasta would work here. Just whatever you have in your pantry or whatever's your favorite, you can sub in here. I was at Ralph's grocery store the other day, and they're owned by Kroger, and I was just admiring all of the different pastas that they had on the pasta aisle. So many different choices, and I'm sure that any of them would work in this dish. I've got some black pepper and some thyme, and I need some oregano, but I'm currently out. I thought I picked some up, but I don't know, maybe it's hiding in the pantry somewhere, but that's fine. I'll just make it with what I have, and I'm sure it's going to be great. I'll start with adding a little oil in the pan, and then I'm just going to saute up my red onions until they're translucent, and this is going to make them be quite sweet. And again, if you don't have onions, you can always just use some onion powder, and I'll put a recipe for you in the description area that tells you how much onion powder to use and also garlic powder, along with all of the substitutions that are possible. But since I had onion, I thought I would go ahead and use it. You'll definitely save a lot of time if you just use onion powder and garlic powder in this recipe. But I did want to use up some of this onion anyway, and I did get such a great deal on the garlic that I've got quite a good supply of it. So I'm just going to saute these for a little while, just being very careful not to burn them, because I'm always in such a hurry when I'm cooking. Sometimes I have my heat up too high, and I have a tendency to burn things, and especially when you're trying to get dinner finished. When you get up at 4 in the morning, you have to get to sleep by 8 just to get 8 hours of sleep. It's just crazy. It feels like there's literally no time at all when I get home from work. So I'm just watching this very closely. And I'll add some water to help this along. Okay, now while that's cooking down, I'm just going to give a taste test. And I want to know if there really is a difference. I know that some people say that they can taste the metallic taste, like the canned taste from canned tomato paste. I've never noticed that before, but then again, I don't really remember ever, eating it raw. So they kind of look the same. I think that the one on the right is just slightly lighter color, and the one on the left, I'm going to try that one first, and that one is the canned. That one has a rich tomato flavor, and I really don't taste any kind of metallic canned taste. And actually, I can't really taste any difference between these two. So I tried this again, just to be sure. They tasted so similar though. I really don't think anybody would be able to know the difference, honestly. I think if anything, maybe the one in the tube was just slightly sweeter, just a tiny amount sweeter. But again, it's really not enough to notice a difference, and the kind in the tube is so much more expensive. I really wouldn't purchase it again. And here's a comparison in different lighting. It almost looks like the canned version is slightly more concentrated. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get started with 1 teaspoon of thyme. And don't ever do this over. Okay, I know this is a really bad idea. However, there's not much time left in the jar, so I just went ahead and did that over the pan. But I have had occasions before where I've done that, and then I accidentally dropped quite a bit into the pan, so it's not a good idea. If you have oregano, you can add 1 teaspoon of that here, but of course I don't, so I'm just adding pepper and thyme. And, if you were going to be adding in onion powder and garlic powder, I think going ahead and adding 1 teaspoon each would be fine. And I would probably add those directly into the sauce. My onions are now beautifully caramelized. They're going to add a lot of sweetness to this dish. So now it's time to add in the tomato paste. And I don't think I've ever made a recipe that's called for this much tomato paste. And if you're using a can, just use the entire can. And then what I'm planning to do is cook this for a while. I've read that this color will deepen a bit, so I'm not really sure, but I let it cook a good long while on the stove just to develop all of these flavors together and to try to brown up the sauce a little bit. When I was making this, I was thinking how perfect this would be with some of those black lentils that I showed you guys about a month or two ago. I think you could even mix some of the black lentils in here, maybe with some of the green or with some of the red. But as you can see, the color is getting darker. I will say, if you use the black lentils, I wouldn't cook them in the sauce because it's going to turn it too dark. I would cook the lentils on the side and then add them in. And here I'm adding in the split red lentils, which are so thin that they're just going to cook right in the sauce. And because I wanted a little bit of substance to the sauce, I decided to add in some of the green lentils. And those are just items that I already had in my pantry. I'll add in the chopped walnuts now. And again, that's purely optional. It is going to help add to the texture of the dish. And usually, well, I made lentil tacos before, and those had a little bit thicker of a chop. So I'm kind of curious how that fine chop on the walnuts is going to turn out. And then for the tomatoes, I'm using fire roasted. I know a lot of recipes call for crushed tomatoes, which is going to blend in with the sauce better, but I do like little chunks of tomatoes in my sauce, so that's why I chose those. But you know, use whatever you like. And if you're in a pinch and you don't have tomatoes at all, I think you could sub in some tomato sauce and it would work just fine. Here is the additional tomato juice that I had left over. I'm going to save that and add that to my soup. And here are the lentils that I cooked at 4:30 this morning, and they're perfect right now. So I'll add these in at the very end because I really don't want them to cook anymore. They'll just turn to mush and kind of end up as part of the sauce, which I don't want. Then I'm adding in my seasoning, and some of the recipes call for adding additional salt. I'm just going to see how this tastes after it cooks for a little while, and then I'll either add salt or a little more of the bouillon. I'm planning on salting the water that I boil my spaghetti noodles in, so I want to be careful not to overdo it on the salt. I'm sure any kind of broth or bouillon would work well in this dish. And this is tasting really good to me at this point. Now I'll let this simmer for a while in order to develop the flavors. And since the green lentils are already done, I'm just going to let them simmer in here for a few minutes while I finish my spaghetti noodles. And for this, I'm using salted water, and then I'm just going to cook this until al dente. The pasta sauce is done at this point, so I've turned the heat off, and now it's time to add in the balsamic vinegar. This is going to add a nice balance to the sauce. If you don't have balsamic vinegar, I've read that you can sub in a little cider vinegar or red wine vinegar and then add about a half a teaspoon of sugar to that, because the balsamic vinegar does have a touch of sweetness to it. It's also going to add some nice richness to the color. I'm so excited to eat this because I've already tasted the sauce and it is fabulous. And besides, I am starving. And just for reference, this is a huge bowl, but I am really hungry. And if I don't eat it all, I can always take it for my lunch tomorrow. This would look great with some Italian parsley. However, I don't have any. So I scoured my fridge and decided to use these greens that I got. These were actually those that I got for $2 that I showed you in one of the last videos, and I wanted to tell you guys anyway. Remember, I didn't know whether to get the spinach or the spring mix, and I've actually just been picking the spinach out of this mix when I want to use spinach in my meals, and it's been working out perfectly. So I think I'm gonna just pull out a few of these spinach leaves. I'll roll them up and cut them in a chiffonade, and then this will look great on top of my dish. I do feel like any meal that is this special does need a little more color on top. Italian parsley would add a nice fresh flavor, but I just didn't have any and I didn't want to go to the store to buy any. But this looks nice as is. I do think this is a beautiful dish. Okay, so let's give it a try all together now. I already know the sauce is good, but I want to try it with the spaghetti. I honestly never thought I would like a sauce like this along with spaghetti. I'm just not really a marinara fan. And I like to have my sauce on top of the spaghetti instead of mix into every little bite, but maybe you want to dip yours up differently. This is just how I like to do mine. And I do just want to say this is so good. I was shocked at what this tasted like. I guess I thought it was going to be more like a marinara, but it's actually it's very savory, very umami, I just can't really put it to words. You're just going to have to try it yourself and see what I'm talking about. I just suggest not going into it with any preconceived notion of what you think it's going to taste like. Even though it has a ton of tomato ingredients in it, it really doesn't have an over-the-top marinara tomatoey flavor. It tastes kind of meatier and just more savory. I just love this dish. It is so good, and everything about it just works for me. I love the flavor. I love the nutritional profile. I love how easy it was, and it's actually going to be easier next time I make it because I'll definitely be using onion powder and garlic powder. And also, I love the fact that it's so cheap to make. Basically, the only expensive item in here really would be the walnuts, and I've actually been getting those on sale, but you can certainly make this without the walnuts. They do give it a little bit of texture. So I do like that. And I had no leftovers from this meal. However, I still had like 3 more servings in the pan. The next day, I took this for my lunch and I added some black Kalamata olives to the sauce. I had it in a separate container so that I could microwave the sauce separately from the noodles because they do take a different amount of time to cook. And this was so good. I loved it for my lunch. And it was at this point that I was thinking I definitely need to make some freezer meals with this so that I have ready to go lunches or dinners anytime I don't feel like cooking. And I really enjoyed what adding the olives brought to this dish. And then one day I added these to a little hoagie roll that I had, and I was actually surprised how delicious that was. Again, I kept both things separate, both the bread and the sauce, and then I heated my bread and then I heated my sauce and then added them together. I'll definitely be making this again, and I was kind of thinking how good some crispy peppercini slices would have been added into this. So it's definitely a recipe that I'm going to play around with. I was thinking you could use this as a filling for calzone. Just so many different ways that you could use this. That's it, guys. I hope you liked this week's video. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a great week. I'll see you Sunday, if not sooner, on my other channel.
Morning has broken, my windows are open. Wanna feel the wind blow through my hair. Which way do I follow? What happens tomorrow? I turn to you and hope you can guide the way.